will be moving along now into Shawn Farrell, who will be presenting his work on reviving an American housing type, a case study analysis of accessory dwelling unit ordinances and land use. His advisor is Larissa Larson of the Taubman School of Architecture and Urban Planning, and his reader is Mark Norman, also of the Taubman School. We'll turn it over to Shawn.
Hi, as you can see, it says Michael Pappas, that's my roommate. Currently my webcam on my laptop is broken, so he was nice enough to share his laptop. So to take reviews by that, I'm Shawn. Hello everyone, good afternoon. Let me share my screen real quick. Hang on. Yeah. So again, thanks Dr. Miller for introducing it. Again, I'm Shawn Farrell, and the title of my presentation is Reviving an American Housing Type, a case study analysis of accessory dwelling unit ordinances and land use. So just going into a little bit about why I'm interested in this topic. A year ago, I was super interested in the tiny house movement and how we can utilize space more efficiently. But I was also learning about urban planning and city planning and how we can plan our future cities to be more climate change resilient, as well as more walkable and dense and more affordable. And accessory dwelling units were kind of the perfect crossroads between how to increase density and improve cities for the future, as well as utilizing space more efficiently. So that's why I dove into this topic. So I just want to introduce a little bit of the current demographic trends of the United States as an introduction. Currently, millions of American households are struggling to pay their income costs or struggling with housing costs, as well as average U.S. household sizes are decreasing, and yet the share of population 65 years and older are increasing. So single-family detached homes, these make up 60% of all U.S. housing types. They are a large portion of U.S. cities. They are also extremely large. They are expensive to maintain, and they make up a large portion of neighborhoods in cities, sometimes as much as 1/2 cities. So the question is, how can we design cities as demographic trends are changing, and yet large portions of our cities are single-family detached homes that are expensive and do not fit with these demographic trends? And that comes in the form of the ADU. So the ADU is an apartment that goes attached onto a single-family lot. They are sometimes attached to the primary dwelling or detached. They are inside the dwelling, sometimes in the basement or attic. Sometimes they're above a garage or converted in that way. This is a trend that is gaining traction because they are adding density to these single-family homes that are largely spread out and large homes. And they're also more affordable compared to the homes in that neighborhood, which are largely dominated by these large single-family detached homes. So ADUs provide a more affordable option. Also, since they're smaller, they have less of an environmental impact, less material usage, less energy intensive. They can also be designed to be more accessible for an aging resident, and they can be built as like a family can build them for an aging homeowner so they can be close to the family. So it works well with the demographic trends that are happening in the United States. It's a trend that's gaining a lot of traction, but yet there are many current barriers to accessory dwelling units. These current barriers include complicated zoning ordinances and permitting fees that are extremely expensive and can render a project unfeasible to many homeowners. There's an ability to find financing. Many homeowners who do decide to do an ADU pay for it out of cash savings. There's an inconsistent knowledge between real estate professionals and lenders and appraisers who do not understand the value of an ADU and the income that it could bring to the homeowner. But yet for many people, it's still an unknown housing type. It is something that people do not know they can add to their lot to provide housing for people, to a family member, so on and so forth. So going into my research and how I decided to go about studying accessory dwelling units is I did 6 case studies, 3 of which were in Michigan, Ann Arbor, Grand Rapids, and Traverse City. And then I looked at 3 other cities, Minneapolis, Minnesota, Santa Cruz, California, and Portland, Oregon, who have had more success with accessory dwelling unit ordinances. I conducted 10 interviews, with 7 of which were with city planners, and 3 of which were with community advocates who have created ADU workshops and do bike tours, 2 of which were in Portland and 1 in Ann Arbor. I created land use maps in ArcMap to look at and explore the potential for ADUs and to understand how much land is zoned to single family, and then determine and calculate how much or how many ADUs we can add. I then did a cross analysis of the city ordinances between these 6 cities to look at the differences in these regulations to see what requirements does Santa Cruz have that Ann Arbor doesn't have, or vice versa, and I dove into that. So as part of the case studies, I looked at housing trends from 2018 U.S. Census estimates to 2020 current website estimates from Zillow. You can see that housing median value of housing is increasing in these 2 years. In some cases, it's jumped extremely high levels. Like in Ann Arbor, it's gone up by $100,000 in 2 years. This is the same for median rent estimates. In 2018 to 2020, rents are increasing by a lot. And again, demographic trends are changing in the United States, so ADUs are a way to adapt to these trends. So let's look at the land use of Ann Arbor and compare it to Portland. I did land use analysis of all 6 of these cities. You can see that single-family residential zones make up 30% of the land use in Ann Arbor, 13% is multifamily. In Ann Arbor, ADUs are only permitted on single-family and 2-family zones. So if 1% of these single-family lots built an ADU, you could increase the number of housing units by over 200. If 15% of these single-family lots had an ADU, you can increase housing by over 3,000 units. So a small percentage of lots could add a large number of housing units. Comparing that just to Portland, for example, which is a much larger city, they have single-family residential zones and they've got 44% of the land use area, while multifamily zones make up 8%. The difference between Portland and Ann Arbor is that in Portland, ADUs are allowed in all residential zones as well as commercial and central employment zones. So this ADU still needs to be a part of a single-family lot, but this allows for a single-family lot that may be zoned as commercial to still have an ADU, thus increasing the potential for ADUs. Being a larger city, in Portland, 1% of single-family lots, if they had an ADU, you could increase the number of housing units by over 1,000, and if 15% of single-family lots had an ADU, you could increase it by over 20. You could increase housing units by over 22,000. So again, a small percentage of single-family lots utilizing an ADU can increase housing units by quite a large number. That being said, showing this table compares all 6 of these cities and looking at these 2 smallest numbers, 1% and 5% of single-family parcels being covered or having an ADU can increase the number of housing units in these cities by hundreds, if not thousands, in these bigger cities, allowing more people to live in the city, increasing density, and providing them a chance to live close to where they work, decreasing commutes. From the interviews, I was able to dive in and learn about the history of ADUs in these municipalities and learn about the observed barriers. From what I learned from city planners, they all support accessory dwelling units because, again, like I said before, they diversify housing types, they increase density, provide another source of income. But I found that for many, the largest barrier to creating a good ADU ordinance was the current residents. Those current residents are against any form of development happening in their neighborhood. So in the end, city planners then appease these current residents and create more restrictive ordinances. This is not the case in Santa Cruz and Portland, where ADU ordinances have been around for a much longer time, 20, 25 plus years. that has allowed them a longer period of time to educate and encourage ADU development and share with residents who have these concerns and share with them the benefits of ADUs. I was also able to ask Portland and Santa Cruz if they had any advice about how to increase ADU development. And the first thing both of them said was that make sure that the first ADU owners or the first ADU developers or homeowners have the easiest possible way of, and they have an extremely easy process of creating ADU because the best advertising comes from current ADU owners. So I also, again, analyzed the ordinances of these 6 cities. I created a very simple table to kind of cross-analyze the differences. I looked at 5 specific requirements: restricted zoning, lot size requirements, design requirements, owner occupancy, and parking requirements. And I very simply looked at if the city had lot size requirements or if they did not. They were given a point if they did, they're not given a point if they did not have that requirement. You can see that the 3 Michigan cities have more of these requirements and have seen less ADU permits being issued versus Minneapolis, Santa Cruz, Portland have less of these restrictions and thus have seen more ADU development. However, the ordinances themselves are not the only reason that development has taken off in these cities. For instance, in Portland, when I interviewed Morgan Tracy, the city planner there, he said that they provided an permit fee waiver, system development charge waiver, which sometimes make up 10% of the cost of the project. So waiving those fees allowed ADU permits to jump. So looking at other alternatives to increase development, as well as providing lots of information. As you can see with Santa Cruz, they provide lots of information for homeowners to learn about ADUs, to understand how much it's going to cost them, to see the construction costs, to help them plan financing, and learn about frequently asked questions. And this is another way that, or possible way that ADU homeowners are possibly increasing in development because there's so much additional information at these other municipalities that's provided. So increasing education opportunities for these homeowners is a great way to possibly increase development. Just to conclude, for my findings, looking at the land use maps, I found that these cities have large portions of single-family neighborhoods, and they provide a great potential to increase the number of housing units in these cities, to increase density, and provide more affordable options, and thus increase the amount of people who can live in the city. From the interviews, I learned that city planners have positive thoughts about ADUs, but many current residents do not share these same thoughts. This can be changed with increasing education efforts and sharing more information about ADUs so homeowners can then not have this fear that they have, even though they know very little about ADUs. I also found that restrictive ADU ordinances are, yes, a barrier, but you need to consider other things besides ADU ordinances, like permitting fees should be reevaluated, as well as providing lots of additional information and educational material to help homeowners. So yeah, overall, ADUs are definitely a great way to increase housing options in cities, but they're not the only way the cities need to look to increase density. And again, it would be great to see how ADUs change cities in the future. And I want to thank Larissa and Mark Norman for being my readers and my thesis advisor, and for the great comments that they provided. So thank you very much, and thanks for listening. So I open it up to all questions.
Thanks, Shawn. Are there any questions for Shawn?
I, of course, have a question. Shawn, this is Larissa. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. I'm happy to, this day marks completion of a long task, and I appreciate your good work on this. I especially love the fact that you worked consistently over the 2 semesters, so you didn't have a crisis at the end. You were actually in good shape. So that not all of us can even accomplish that, so that's great. My question is about sanitary sewage water. I was really surprised that you didn't find that there were concerns about existing sort of capacity issues of systems. In ADUs, are you generally hooking into the existing home's plumbing system? And do you ever have to pay an impact fee when you do, if you connect?
Yes, so for the most part, ADUs are connected to the current residents the primary residents, they are connected. That is much cheaper than connecting the ADU to the city fee. That's something that Ann Arbor struggled with at the start. They didn't allow ADUs to be attached to the primary dwelling, and instead they had to connect separately to the city service line, and those fees were upwards of $10,000, which is a large portion of the project fee. So yeah, there are definitely large impact fees to connect to either the city or the primary dwelling unit. And from the interviews, besides the barriers of current residents, one of the largest barriers to development was the cost of the permitting fees and the impact fees of construction costs. So yeah, it'd be very interesting to see and compare and to dive more into the permit fees specifically to see if those can be reevaluated and possibly changed. Yeah, because that's something that Portland has done really well. Is they've reduced those impact fees, and they've seen a huge number of development.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Additional questions? So Shawn, one of the things that you mentioned was that homeowners in particular did not seem keen on these structures. Could you just talk a little bit more about what the resistance is there and sort of, I know you mentioned education is key as far as helping potentially come across some of these resistance, but what are some of the major underlying themes that you see there? And what kinds of education would help?
Yeah, I know, like, I specifically think of my interview with Chris Chang, a city planner in Ann Arbor, and a lot of the fear that he heard from homeowners was that there's going to be students moving into their neighborhoods, there's going to be way too many cars and so much traffic, and they were just afraid of any type of development at all. And I guess, but going off of that, another planner from Minneapolis talked about how when he heard feedback from homeowners, most of them rarely even noticed that there was an ADU in their neighborhood. So showing and providing that information to homeowners that ADUs are really a great form of hidden density, that they are a very small form of density that people don't even notice sometimes. And I guess increasing that education and showing them that there's, I guess, ways to increase density and you would barely even notice.
Any additional questions?
Hi, this is Mark Norman. I was just going to ask a quick question. Great job, Shawn.
Thanks.
For me, I think especially in the Ann Arbor context, we see a lot of homeowners that will double the size of their house, their single-family house. We'll see small houses becoming bigger houses. And I think from an environmental angle, in many cases, the ADU intervention is actually less than what a typical just renovation and expansion of a house would be. And I was wondering if you looked at that when you did your analysis, looking at sort of the permits pulled for just a regular house expansion versus an ADU, because I think it'd be an interesting thing to look at from an environmental perspective.
Absolutely, I agree. That was something I didn't dive too deep into, was the permitting fees and that structure, because it's so different based on each city. But if I could do this again and look deeper into it or continue this research, I think looking at the differences between permitting fees would really add on to this project.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Shawn, for your presentation. We virtually applaud you. Thanks all for questions. And so congratulations on finishing your thesis.
Thank you.
And so we'll be moving along.